This is 20 Minutes of Impact from the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast, sponsored by Energy Hub. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on virtual power plants, or VPPs, my guest is Michael Smith, CEO of National VPP Development Powerhouse, CPower Energy. Mike's going to describe the role VPPs composed of distribution system located and customer-owned distributed energy resources can play in meeting today's demand growth and affordability challenges. Mike's 3 decades plus in the energy sector includes time in legal counsel and executive leadership positions with sector giants like Constellation Energy and Exelon, before becoming CEO of CPower Energy in July 2023. So, Mike, CPower has been monetizing VPPs composed of customer-owned distributed energy resources, or DER, since 2015. It's over a decade. So before we get to specifics about VPPs today, give us an overview of how CPower's business and business model developed.
Sure. And first, Herman, thanks for having me on. It's a very, very exciting time to be talking about VPPs in this industry. We're having a bit of a moment. So CPower has been doing this as long as anybody, as you recognized. We are one of the nation's largest VPP power plant portfolios. We have about 6.7 gigawatts of flexible energy spread across around 23,000 customer sites. And that's in really all of the markets in the continental United States that recognize the value of these assets. We aggregate flexible load and behind the meter assets and bid them into these wholesale markets as reliability resources. An important point here is you think about like the need to address affordability across the energy landscape. We've returned to customers more than $14 billion in revenues over the last decade or so. Look, rather than building new power plants, which we all need to do, but you can't do overnight, we sit there, we and our peers in the VPP space unlock power plants already sitting behind the meter and help customers monetize the flexibility that they didn't even realize they had.
Interesting, yeah. And when you don't have to build power plants, that means the utility doesn't have to add the cost of that power plant into customers' rates. That's how it addresses the rate issue for everybody. Even if you don't own ER, you still save money when VPPs thrive, right?
Well, that's exactly right. Here's the way I think about it. We want to interconnect more load, especially large AI-driven loads, to drive our economy forward. We need to do that as an industry, as a national economy. We need to build power plants in order to effectuate that, but they're going to take time to build. In the very near term, we create the value, the grid value, to allow these larger loads, to allow the economy really to grow. And while the power plant development world catches up, and the way I think about it is the efficiency of the machine. You can't decide what power plants to build, what transmission to build, and where until the existing machine, the bulk power grid, is running as efficiently as possible. The best way to do that is to ensure that you're using all the load flexibility at your disposal.
Yeah, and as much as the hyperscalers are making it seem like everything has to happen right now, it's not going to happen right now. It's going to happen over time, much faster and much bigger than it has been for the last couple of decades, but still over time. And using this flexibility that you guys can provide sort of gives the system a chance to say, wait a minute, maybe we don't need as much. Maybe we don't have to spend as much. Maybe we can save ratepayers even more than we thought we could, right?
Absolutely. Flexibility is the capacity you can activate tomorrow, not 10 years from now. It's the fastest megawatt we can deploy. And I want to be really clear what we mean by flexibility. It's not just on-site batteries and on-site generation. We have those in our portfolio, but it's also industrial processes, HVAC set points, lighting, anything that consumes electricity in a commercial or industrial building can potentially be part of a VPP, can potentially be taught to be flexible.
Yeah, okay. And I want to get more into that very subject. CPower's been, I think you guys are largely composed of DER assets owned by commercial and industrial customers. Before I even finish asking a question, Have I got that right? You're largely the larger commercial industrial customers up to date, isn't that correct?
That's correct. We aggregate commercial industrial load. We've poked around the residential space a little bit. I think that's someplace we'd like to grow. We certainly see the market as being very, very large in the residential space, but our expertise is and has been in the commercial industrial space, large industrial facilities, hospitals, universities, school districts, smaller commercial entities, those kinds of things.
And the reason I point that out is I'm curious to know how the attitudes of system operators and utilities toward those kinds of VPPs has evolved since 2015. And what has changed about CPower's VPPs that maybe has helped drive that evolution? In other words, have you learned to do things better with VPPs, and has that given system operators and utilities the opportunity to use them better?
Absolutely. So when we first CPower first started in this industry, let's just use benchmark 2015. I think we started actually before that. It was a very much a kind of blunt force instrument. It was, the regulated utility or the RTO would ask for load drop. We would place phone calls to plant operators who would run around flipping breakers, and it was kind of on or off. And since then, we've evolved to not only capture more different types of flexible assets like flexible computing load, variable drive motors, that kind of thing, but we're much more able to fine tune the delivery of that product and the aggregation of that product in the marketplace. So you can do very, very small changes to a plant operation or to a building comfort level that have zero impact or very little impact on the operation, but still get load drop out of those. So that's one thing, much more kind of fine tuning of the asset. Two is automation. Many more of our flexible assets are fully automated, where I get a dispatch from the RTO that goes through our NOC, our network operations center, directly to the customer and the customer's asset response. So no human intervention. And third is we participate in more programs. So we're not just a capacity asset anymore, but we're in ancillary services programs with these assets, and even customers can seek energy rents in these markets. So a lot more happens in the kind of demand response space writ large than did a decade ago.
So that a decade ago, I don't think the term VPP had been coined yet.
Correct.
What you were doing was called demand response. In other words, when there was a demand that was very high, utilities or system operators needed a response. And like you say, you used to call people up and ask them to turn their loads down, their usage down. And that has evolved into something that's very digitized and automated, and not fully, but on the way. Now, in those days, the markets used demand response. Nowadays, those markets have evolved. And if you look at, you're in California, you're in Texas, you're in New England markets. Those are very different. Has demand response through VPPs become more similar in those markets, or has it become more different as demand response has evolved to include VPPs? Do you see what I'm asking? Are you seeing differences, or is everything sort of starting to look the same because the product is more well defined?
It's a great question. And you would think you would have product convergence in these markets over time. In fact, I would submit you have exactly the opposite. So California single state RTO is kind of going in one direction, a lot of utility involvement in demand response space, which crowds out the ability for aggregators like CPower to pick up large swaths of load. Texas, non-FERC jurisdictional, does not have a capacity market. It's all energy, so it behaves quite differently. MISO capacity market, yes, but very balkanized in the states. PJM has the most kind of sophisticated, well-run capacity market. And ISO New England also has a capacity market, but those capacity markets are also vastly different. So whereas I would look to something that you kind of converge these products, particularly for the large national participants, the big box retailers, the entities that have stores in all these states, but we're going in the opposite direction. I'm not sure that there's any regulatory interest in creating standard products around these things. It's not something that we've been really good at as a energy industry in any aspect of what we do. And I would expect that would continue to be somewhat balkanized across the various RTOs. And then throw in the utility programs and you have a whole different can of worms.
Right. And that is the nature of the U.S. Electric regulatory system. And we're going to get in a few minutes to a question. I want to get put your thinking cap on and see if you can suggest any improvement. Here's a quick note from the sponsor of our series of podcasts about virtual power plants, Energy Hub. What if everyday devices had the potential to strengthen the grid when it's needed most? Energy Hub helps utilities turn that potential into dependable capacity by coordinating thermostats, EVs, batteries, and other devices so they work together as virtual power plants, or VPPs, that respond to grid needs in near real time. Energy Hub's latest white paper lays out a maturity model for VPPs that can be planned and dispatched with the same confidence as conventional plants while being 40 to 60% less expensive to build. That's why more than 160 utilities across North America partner with Energy Hub to manage over 2.5 million devices that provide 3.4 gigawatts of flexible capacity. Read the white paper and discover what VPPs can do for your grid at energyhub.com. But before I ask that, I want to ask the question that remains on the table. You have, what did you say, 6.7 gigawatts? Is that what you said, Mike?
That's right.
Yeah. But it's all over the country. I mean, some of it's in Texas, some of it's in California. Can your VPPs be large enough and flexible enough to help address this growing large load electricity demand in specific locations? And especially that demand, it's not necessarily happening just in the traditional demand peak. Some of these data centers, they need the same huge amount of energy 24/7. So are there resources in your portfolios, at least in some places, that can be large enough and flexible enough to be pivotal in achieving the scale and flexibility that you need to address these new large loads?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I think about it is not the resources that we CPower or we as an industry have available to us now, but the resources that have not chosen to participate in these markets, that are still sitting on the sideline, that aren't participating in these markets. So the game here is to attract more customers to participate. But yeah, there's plenty of sidelined load, people that either do nothing or they just peak shave. They just try to shave their 5 coincident peaks throughout the course of the year and save money that way, that aren't participating in the administrative markets. There's plenty of ability, untapped resource in this space. And part of our job as the industry, not just CPower, is to work with our colleagues on the RTO side, on the regulatory side, at the state side, to come up with ways to attract this load into the market.
So in other words, you're saying you can bring more commercial and industrial customers into your portfolio, and that way work with them to learn how to automate what they can of load reductions, their heating and air conditioning units, and their water heating units. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm saying. I just want to be real careful with the word automate. I want to continue to encourage customers to allow us to automate their load reductions. We think that's the most reliable resource for the grid. But many customers do not or cannot choose to take that path. We meet the customers where they are. If they want to get a dispatch signal from us and run around flipping breakers, good on them. We're going to take those as a customer as long as they can reliably perform to the expectation that we've set with them and the relevant grid operator. We are seeing more and more customers interested in making the investments to be automated. Batteries are great for that, but we're going to have a whole panoply of customers, some that are quasi-automated, some that have overrides in the automation, some that are fully automated, some that are fully manual. We're going to meet the customers where they are. The net, though, is There's a lot of loads sitting out there that we think we can bring into these markets with the right rules and the right incentives.
What about residential customers? Do you see your company moving into that space? And if not, what would you say are the barriers that or obstacles that you don't want to deal with, if I may?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would love to see us move into the residential space, and I think our recent acquisition by NRG, who's doing some things through its Vivint affiliate in the residential VPP space, will help us accelerate that. What I don't think CPower should be doing is rolling trucks to homes. We're not set up to do that. But I do think where, Vivint, Nest, where somebody's already in the home with a smart thermostat that can aggregate those thermostats and then send them to us as a bulk asset that we can deploy in the markets, that makes a lot of sense for us. And we've poked around with that a little bit, but there's still some constraints in the markets for that, particularly in ways where it's hard to get information from utilities. That's an age-old problem, not just for our industry, but for retail energy. Two, RTOs tend to, capacity markets tend to look at an individual residential customer as the same as a large industrial customer in terms of the metering and data collection needed. If we could get some aggregation rules, and there's actually a case at FERC now to open that up, this huge market opens up, and we'd like to be part of it.
That's Order 2222 that you're referring to?
2222 really sets the states on a path to try to open up their VPP markets. I'm talking about a complaint that was recently filed with PJM to try to change the way the metering and data aggregation rules work there to allow more residential load to come in. And we have filed in support of that case, or will be, and support that outcome. We think that there are ways you can statistically sample your many small loads in order to get a really high level of fidelity in how they're performing. And that's really what this is about, as opposed to having to show an individual meter read for each load drop for each residential customer.
Yeah, you if you have that kind of expectation of the residential market, you're just basically saying you're never going to be able to bring residential customers into the mix.
Exactly.
You mentioned your acquisition by NRG Energy. Just curious, do you have any ideas about how that's going to affect your business?
Well, we're working through all those things now. NRG also has a demand response business, and there's a lot of similarity between the two businesses, some differences, and we're just a couple weeks into this and really working through kind of how those businesses will link up and work together. We are collectively very excited about the opportunity to be part of a much larger commercial energy franchise. We think NRG is a fabulous company, and are excited about how these demand response businesses will be able to grow together in the future.
That'll be interesting to see. Okay, one last question, Mike. Federal policies for the kinds of resources, many of the kinds of resources you using your VPPs have changed dramatically in the last year or so. But thinking ahead, thinking creatively, what kinds of technical or policy changes are fundamental to allowing VPPs like you manage to go to larger scales and to monetize more services to the grid, including new services? You mentioned ancillary services. What policy or technical changes that could be imposed by policies do you need?
I'm gonna address this, Herman, a couple different ways. So let's start with what could be done really quickly at the bulk power grid level. There's a lot of cases where state policy and RTO programs are not harmonized. And so states have their kind of demand response programs, RTOs have their demand response programs, and those things clash. And when they clash, customers either get confused and don't participate, or get penalized for participating in one at the expense of the other. So fixing that state regional harmonization piece is hugely important. Two is a matter of product definition. There's some cases where there's a gap between what the customers expect to have happen when they sign up. I sign up to be an emergency resource, But now I'm getting called as a non-emergency resource for multiple hours and multiple days. What's up with that? So the customer's saying, I'm not sure I can participate because I don't know what I'm actually signing up for. So harmonizing that can be done very quickly. And I think it should be.
Hold on, just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't that just a matter of how you uh, enroll the customer? You make that clear so they don't have that confusion? Or are you saying that there's something about the rules for the bulk system and the rules for the state system that force you into that dilemma?
I'm saying the latter. Yes, there's rules that are inconsistent or inconsistently applied that create this dilemma for our customers. And so
FERC can address
harmonizing.
that?
Sorry.
And FERC can address that?
FERC can address that, but I think the shorter path is to have the grid operator recognize that those inconsistencies are driving load away from these programs. Here's the problem. If you're a grid operator and you want more VPP load demand response, and you're scratching your head why it's not showing up, you have to think about, okay, what things can I do to get it to come back to this market? Because customers always have the choice to do nothing. These are real, living, breathing human beings operating a business. They would not otherwise do this unless there was something in it for them. So they can just do nothing, or they can just peak shave and not participate. And if they don't participate in the organized administrative market, you as the grid operator don't have access to that asset to dispatch to work to manage your grid. So getting those rules right can be done pretty quickly. We've seen some really discrete examples of that. Then the other thing I would say, much longer term, but I think really important, Order 719 that enabled demand response in the first place is nearly 20 years old. And the world, as you're in your first couple of questions recognize, has changed dramatically over the last 20 years. I'd love to see FERC kind of dust off Order 719 and say, hey, RTOs, we need more of this stuff on the system. What are you doing? Like, how are things working? How do we monetize 719 for the real world? I think that would obviously take longer, but it would, I think, help put some light on some of the things that are creating barriers to customers participating in these markets and maybe help that along.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, when the Department of Energy has asked PJM and asked FERC to address this need, this way to serve the large loads, the data centers, and flexibility is certainly one of those key ways. So then go back to 719, right? You could serve the request from DOE to FERC by addressing reconsideration of 719. Is that something you think is legitimate?
Yeah, I think reconsideration might be a strong word, but maybe just dusting off what's been done. Like, what's the update? From the RTOs over the last 20 years, and even if it was a technical conference, like what is the market seeing? What are large customers seeing? What are aggregators like CPower seeing? What are the RTOs seeing? What are the state jurisdictional utilities seeing? Because that's relevant, even though it's not FERC jurisdictional, it's relevant what's happening in the states, again, to this kind of state regional harmonization thing. So there's a lot to unpack.
That's one of the ways that the federal regulators get feedback from the states is through these technical conferences. It's a great idea. I think we're going to leave it there, Mike. It's been a great conversation. I want to thank my guest, CPower Energy CEO Mike Smith, for describing the increased role VPPs can play in meeting today's demand growth, affordability challenges, and making some substantial suggestions about changes that can improve meeting those needs. I also want to thank our sponsor, Energy Hub. And as always, I want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.